Hey guys, hello again, it's me, Shazin. Welcome to number 7 of the S2 training tier 1. God, never gets old how I struggle to say that over and over again per video. Anyway, continuing with our little project from before, which is maximizing the efficiency out of Dubai, right? We talked about enhanced wake turbulence separation. Pretty neat, wasn't it? Bringing down timings, look at this, right? Where you once needed 2 minutes, you can bring it down to 1 minute 20s and 1 minute 40s. And distances come down drastically as well. Allows you to be more efficient. Can we do better than that? Of course we can. It's Dubai. Turns out, this is another one that we can try and hit square in the face. So, to review, runway separation minima, if you remember, over here in this little picture, Mr. Yellow cannot get a takeoff clearance until and unless... Yeah, we know this. This guy needs to be completely past the threshold. Kind of annoying, isn't it? Likewise, this guy needs to be past... Well, it doesn't help that I've drawn the stop bar in the same color as the runway in this drawing. I'll maybe do a more saturated red. Can you tell the difference? I can't. Okay, hang on. I'll do something about this. Let's do a different color. Let's do an orange, or a brown. Why not? Or dark orange, as it's called, even. Okay, anyway, coming back on track. So, stop bar. I'll draw that in red. Thank you very much. So, this guy, he needs to be completely... Yeah, we know this story as well. It's annoying, isn't it? Well, what if this guy's really close on short final? God damn it, he needs to do a go-around. That's pretty sad. Well, wouldn't it be nice if I now sort of draw this in the top-down view, which is kind of sad because I have to get rid of my really nicely drawn planes. Oh dear. So... let's draw this sort of thing, and let's draw this sort of thing. Okay. Right. So we've established now that this is the problem. This little thing all the way at the end. Is there a way that we could somehow sort of bring this a bit forwards? In addition to that, this whole stop bar business, can we sort of rely more on, you know, the Mark 1 eyeball and sort of assess ourselves like, yes, I can see you turning, and in addition to that, I have given you expedited taxi instructions, or I have given you a plan to vacate point or something, I don't know. Well, if you prescribe such conditions, which again, Dubai has, lo and behold, ladies and gentlemen, we have reduced runway separation minimum. Here I am struggling with colors again. And drawing, writing for that matter. There we go. Reduced runway separation minima. This gets pretty epic real quick. So, Dubai, now this is a really simplified explanation. It's not exactly how it's done, but just to kind of keep it simple for purposes of understanding, Dubai has conducted some analysis and some studying and found that there's a certain point where, on average, most aircraft rotate into the air. So one guy rotates here, one guy rotates there, one guy rotates here, let's say, and then you just rerun this a bunch of times, and you sort of deduce that a common sort of heat zone, so to speak, is around this area here, let's say. And on top of that, similar sort of situation for planes that land. A lot of them manage to vacate here most of the time. Sometimes they have to go to the end and choose a different vacate point. Sometimes they even vacate here. So where these two things meet, where most of whatever happens associated with the runway tends to be your smoking gun, right? So, aha, this is where most planes rotate. Aha, this is where most planes manage to vacate. Well, then let's just use that as the reference point. Boom. Now, obviously, it's not so simple. This is not how it works in real life, I'm sure. It's a much more thorough analysis. This is just the sort of the way I like to think about it. Before we continue with such heavily improvised stories, let's now actually get into what is actually prescribed in Dubai. So this little mark right here exists, and you can see that in your aerodrome documentation. So under Dubai Tower, let's come down here, and if you look at reduced runway separation minima, you can see that there are prescribed sort of reference points. As you can see, 2,500. So preceding landing aircraft has landed and has vacated the runway or has passed a point at least 2,500 meters from the threshold of the runway, a beam, a certain taxiway, blah, 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 blah. In other words, if you look on your radar screen, if you have your runways configured correctly, you should see something like this. As you can see, 30 right RSM. So now, if an aircraft rotates and they are past this mark here, as it says RSM, with a big line on it, guess what? You can give takeoff clearances. Likewise, if your aircraft has commenced a vacate, which by the way now, in addition to RSM, you are also benefiting from what's called rapid exits, RETs, rapid exits. So this is a conventional exit where an aircraft has to slow down often to 10, sometimes even 5 knots to make this 90-degree turn. Whereas here, the exit is designed at such a specific curvature such that you can actually, in an aircraft, decelerate and take this turn starting from 50 knots and decelerate to 30, and then obviously slow down to 10 eventually, which is a much quicker decelerate. It's a much sort of your deceleration schedule and the curve of it, I guess, for the lack of better phrasing on that. You basically cover this distance much quicker. It's much quicker to do something like this as opposed to doing something like this. Sometimes, funny enough, even if this point is actually closer than the actual rapid exit itself. This is very possible. Very, very possible. In fact, let's make it a little bit more drastic. Something like this. Believe it or not, it might actually be faster to do this than to do this. Certainly on flight sim it is, because oftentimes flight simulators, the ground physics really isn't quite there yet at the time of making this video, where most aircraft, from what I've seen, if you dip below 10 knots, the way the ground friction sort of behaves with the aircraft sort of gets a little funny, and they take a long time to make this little turn right here. It's kind of weird, but yeah, it's not too surprising to see something like this. Now, obviously, this is not to scale. Don't hold me against this if you see an airport that looks exactly like this. In reality, I'm talking about something like doing something like Kilo 9 versus something like Kilo 11. Plus, they get to their gates quicker. It's just better. Rapid exits for the win. On top of that, if you can see that they have started their exit, if you can assess that that's happening, as long as that rapid exit is past the RSM mark, then congratulations. Aircraft on final can be given landing clearances. So to know the exact conditions, you have to go through your documentation again. When can you apply RSM? First of all, there are other conditions to think about, most of which is visual, because as it turns out, a lot of what we do here is dependent on the pilots themselves maintaining visual contact with the aircraft. So if I just do this real quick. Okay. So that's way too big. I'll just resize that a bit. So this aircraft here, in order for him to be able to assess, and for us to be able to assess that separation is going to be assured, they need to be taking a look at what's happening on the runway. Continuous visual separation. So for that to happen, you have to provide traffic information. You have to provide traffic information, relevant traffic information. So here are your examples. Again, just go through the library. Emirates 906, 777 vacating at kilo 6, wind whatever, runway 30 left, clear to land. Similar thing for departures. An aircraft has to see for themselves that the plane has departed. Because at the end of the day, this is a non-standard separation minima. This is a reduced separation minima. This is different to what pilots are expecting per whatever they've been taught per the manuals of ICAO separation minimas. This is reduced, so the pilot needs to know that, hey, take a look at this guy. Traffic is a 777 departing ahead. Traffic is a 737 departing ahead, winds whatever, runway 30 right, clear takeoff. So if we're thinking in terms of visual separations and visual contacts, you have to have weather conditions that permit this, which is why this is the easiest one to understand. You have meteorological conditions to be met. And that comes down to visibility being greater than 5,000 meters and the cloud ceiling. So what defines a cloud ceiling? You have to be careful on that. Just because there's a cloud layer doesn't mean that there's a cloud ceiling. It has to be either a broken cloud ceiling, a broken cloud layer or an overcast layer. Just because you have scattered clouds that say, so it says less than 1,000 feet. You can have scattered clouds or few clouds below. Sorry, let me just rephrase that. You can have maybe isolated clouds or just anything below overcast and few. Below 1,000 feet, that does not become a ceiling. Whereas if you have an overcast or few, then there you go. So it's all to do with visibility. Next, we're dealing with vacating aircraft. Again, if you kind of come back to my analogy, you can see based off of that quote-unquote survey, this works most of the time when your braking action isn't affected. So what happens when it's a wet runway? Braking distances increase. It's a wet runway now. Braking distances increase. So there should be no obvious evidence that braking action will be adversely affected. So whether it's slush, rain, luckily here in Dubai it's not much of an issue most of the time. Now this is the part that's important to us. You as a controller should be able to assess the separation visually. So what helps actually is to have a tower view with your pilot client for VATSIM connected to your controller client and be able to literally look out the window, metaphorically, literally. Or by radar-derived information, which, as we said, as you can see, we have in the form of these little ticks, RSM, RSM. And again, where they sit, it's also written in the library, where they actually sit. And you also have suitable landmarks and markers on the surface surveillance system to be able to assist. So again, similar thing, but now think of it as a landmark. Just shy of Mike 3 Alpha, November 3 Alpha, just shy of Kilo 8 and Mike 1-1. And again, if you flip it to 1-2s, you have to look at where those suitable landmarks are. Now, this is an obvious one. You can't apply RSM if you need to apply wake turbulence separation. Makes sense? Minimum separation should continue to exist. And in the case of landing aircraft, to expedite that flow, because again, we are using now visual cues to see, okay, yes, he is in fact vacating. You can see him turning. Even though he's not past the stop bar, we can see that he is quote-unquote vacating. And then for that to work, they need to be advised that that is your vacate point. On initial contact, plan to vacate, which as you can see for Dubai, per your landmark, it's Kilo 8. Or really any rapid exit, as long as it's past the landmark. So if this is your RSM, you can use Kilo 8, Kilo 6. Kilo 9 is a rapid exit, but that's not for RSM. As you can see, it's behind that mark. I would use Kilo 9 if aircraft touch down and they're too slow and you want to get them off the runway as fast as possible. Which, again, it's better to do this as opposed to doing something like this. Among other reasons, like these are, you know, it's going to conflict with taxi out flows and everything. So really don't do that. Just stick to Kilo 9, Kilo 8 for RSM, Kilo 6 for RSM, depending on where they are parking. So if they're parking somewhere here, Kilo 8 makes sense. Again, this is why now you can, if we come back to what I said at the beginning, why do we need this space? As you can see, we can expedite that flow of traffic. So vacate Kilo 8, continue right Kilo, hold Kilo Mike, and then contact ground if they're going to taxi in like this. Hold Kilo Lima if they're going to taxi into one of these. Or if they're going to go even further still, or somewhere here, or even here, it's like across. Kilo, Kilo. But they keep moving, and this is such that if they ever do dare slow down, because at the end of the day, these are VATSIM pilots, you have to cater to all kinds of skill sets on VATSIM. Some of them could be veterans, some of them could be on their first ever VATSIM flight. And they might not recognize that if they become stationary to do their after landing checklists, this is a bad place to stop. You have to be able to shout at them. And had they been handed over to ground, well, that's going to eat into your RSM pretty quickly, isn't it? So you should be there to expedite. Hey, no, hey, continue moving. Don't just sit there. Expedite, continue right Kilo or something. Just whatever it takes to keep them moving. So as you can see, this is why the AOR is shaped in this way for 3-0 left specifically. This should now hopefully make a lot of sense. And now, with this picture complete, if we come back to sequencing for a second, based off of all of these tools that we have here, on all of these tools, if you have multiple aircraft taxiing to your runway, so I'll draw a runway here. Let's say you have one aircraft. I'm just gonna keep the drawing simple. One aircraft here, one aircraft here, one guy here, oh, different color. One guy there, and one guy, let's do this one. Nope, let's not do that one. Let's do that one, sure, okay. And let's say you have like a lot of holding points to play with. So you have one holding point here, another holding point here, another holding point here. So in other words, they're all gonna meet up and converge and just sort of sit there. So he's going to be waiting. This guy's going to be waiting. This guy's going to be waiting. And this guy's going to be waiting. Now, to be efficient, again, I talked about departure rates, right? So within 5 minutes, come up with a sequence of these planes such that you maximize your departure rate. So again, depending on, okay, this guy is a 737. This guy is a 738 flying the RIDAP 2 Foxtrot departure. This guy is a 777 flying SEMPA 2 Foxtrot. This guy is an A320neo flying Nabix 3 Foxtrot. And we have an A380 up ahead, flying the, let's say, DAVMO 4 Foxtrot. Actually, you know what? Let's just complicate it a bit. Let's say that this guy is also on the SEMPA. All right? So now, what order should we line up and subsequently depart, and then give the other guy a lineup and subsequently depart in such a way where when folks are lined up on the runway, they don't have to sit and wait for separation as much, depending on if you do a good sequence or a bad sequence. And this is why sequencing is so important. And with all these holding points that we have, look, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, And we got planes back here, all the way here. And we could even send them around if we wanted to. I'll talk about that later in a future video. Well, then it makes perfect sense to have folks calling us nice and early. So, for example, if I have a lighter guy following a heavier guy. I apologize if this drawing, let's make it a little bit more easier to see. That didn't help. Yellow should do it. There we go. So let's say this guy is a 737. And this guy is an A380. Now if you're a ground controller, you'll know they all depart usual departure point of Mike 13 Alpha. That's what you assign us. But that would mean now 737 would have to wait, what is that, 1 minute? 2 minutes 20, right? Is there a way I could instead send this guy the next holding point, which then opens up this one for the 737 to come out, and now he departs, A380 gets an RSM clearance. So in the same span of time, granted you lose a little bit of time waiting for this guy to, move up ahead and for this guy to now catch up the queue, so you got to time it right. Which is why, again, you have all this room. If they slow down, you could say, hey, come on, speed up a bit. And finally, when they get there, you have a sequence, a very efficient sequence, which will now be our next point of discussion, because sequencing is what makes or breaks a tower controller. Not only that, this is departure sequencing. How do you take into account maybe if you have a runway closed, because the other runway only has arrivals coming in most of the time. But what if that runway was closed and you're dealing with single runway ops and you have arrivals coming in? Once again, could you now add spacing between the two to take advantage of the fact that you have a landing aircraft? So in other words, traditionally you wouldn't do something like this because he would have to wait. But then again, with that wait, you can now leave the runway vacant for an arriving aircraft. So sequencing is the next thing to think about.